Trump enjoyed seeing his FBI raid the home of one of his political enemies for classified documents.
I'm not a fan of John Bolton. I thought he was a sleazebag, actually.
And as a top Democrat tried out a huge dose of Trumpian trolling as he picks a fight with the president.
We can't just think differently. We have to act differently.
But the magic word for President Trump these days, takeover. First, the District of Columbia Police. Now he says he wants to put boots on the ground in other big cities not run by the federal government.
I think Chicago will be our next, and then we'll help with New York.
And it was a takeover at America's second largest microchip maker as Trump takes an ownership share in Intel for taxpayers.
He walked in wanting to keep his job, and he ended up giving us $10 billion for the United States.
On the economy, it's good news and bad news for the administration as the Federal Reserve signals a long-sought rate cut. The bad news, the reason why.
The effects of tariffs on consumer prices are now clearly visible.
And as Russia steps up its attacks on Ukraine, including hitting an American-owned factory, no word on getting Vladimir Putin back to the bargaining table for at least, you guessed it,
I think in 2 weeks we'll know which way I'm going.
Let's get into all of it. With us today, Republican Senator Eric Schmitt of Missouri on where his party might draw the line on new executive powers. Former Democratic Senator Doug Jones of Alabama on the bid to get Democrats out of the doldrums. And a special new feature on the USA at 250 as we prepare for the nation's big birthday, examining the connections today between Christianity and liberty with Jonathan Rauch. All that and our best in the business panel of journalists. The Hill Sunday starts now. Hello from Washington and welcome to the Hill Sunday. I'm Chris Stirewalt. Okay, on Friday, President Trump announced that the federal government was taking a 10% stake in Intel, the California-based chip maker. The company was awarded $9 billion in grants from the 2022 CHIPS Act, but the government hadn't dispersed the funds Congress appropriated. Now, to get that bailout, the company's CEO has agreed to give a 10% stake to the government with options to acquire more stock. The move is just the latest private sector intervention by the president. President Trump cut a deal with semiconductor companies NVIDIA and Advanced Micro Devices to allow an exemption to national security restrictions on selling high-powered chips to China in exchange for a 15% share of those sales for the U.S. government. Or the deal with Japan's Nippon Steel in exchange for allowing the merger with U.S. Steel, the president got a golden share in the company that basically gives the administration a seat on the board and veto power over big decisions. And last month, the Pentagon took a 15% stake in MP Materials, America's largest rare earth mining company, with a commitment to invest billions and purchase its rare earth magnets, which are used in high-tech military and consumer products. The Wall Street Journal calls it state-run capitalism with American characteristics, a nod to China's centrally planned economy. The White House says it's just taking care of taxpayer interests. With us now from Missouri, Republican Senator Eric Schmitt. His new book is Last Line of Defense, How to Beat the Left in Court. Senator, I want to get to the microchips because I'm sure that you, as a former attorney general, a lawyer, a conservative, have a lot to say. But I want to start with some other news. The president says he wants to send the military, maybe even active duty troops, and not just the National Guard, to fight crime in Chicago and New York. So I have a couple questions around that for you. Why those cities, when places like Memphis and even your own St. Louis have worse violent crime problems?
Well, actually, I'm glad you asked that because we were able to announce earlier this week an arrangement with the FBI to have the largest per capita investment of permanent FBI agents in St. Louis with intel officers to take on violent crime. And so I think Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, and my conversations with them during the confirmation process made it very clear they wanted to get FBI agents out of Washington, D.C. and into the field. So I think that is happening. I think St. Louis can be a model for that. When I was Attorney General, we partnered with federal prosecutors to take on violent crime when you had a Soros prosecutor who wouldn't do her job. So I think that's actually happening. As it relates to the National Guard, though, the National Guard's been deployed to make sure ICE agents are protected for their deportations. And of course, Washington, D.C. is kind of a different example because it's a federal enclave. But I think the results speak for themselves, Chris. I mean, you didn't have a murder in a week. I know that shouldn't be such a big deal. It is. Carjackings are down 85%. Robberies are down nearly 50%. Violent crime altogether is down 25%. So it's been significant. I just finally say this as a former prosecutor myself. There's just no substitute for having law enforcement visible and on the streets in prosecutions, not just getting the bad guys off the streets, but the deterrent effect it has as well.
So, but you make the point about that Washington is a federal district under the control of the federal government. If a Democrat tried to do this on another issue, right, in another city, like enforcing environmental rules or protecting transgender rights or whatever, right, if Joe Biden had nationalized the National Guard in red states to enforce laws that they thought were being inadequately enforced, I assume that Republican attorneys general would be sounding the alarm. What are the constitutional limiting principles in your mind around when the president can nationalize the National Guard?
Well, you saw it clearly in times of national emergency or, say, a wildfire situation in California. But you also saw, which was held up in the courts, by the way, when federal agents like ICE or the FBI are trying to do their jobs and they're being attacked by violent mobs. That's exactly what was happening in Los Angeles. President Trump was well within his rights to have the National Guard deployed. National Guard can help out, support what's happening with law enforcement. I think that's what President Trump has talked about, is making sure local law enforcement can do their job, and then you have sort of the support that the National Guard can, and protection that the National Guard can provide.
What about the regular military? What are the circumstances legally, constitutionally, when the president could direct regular military forces into America's cities?
Well, I think you saw one example of that again in Los Angeles, where the Marines were out there to make sure the ICE agents who were under attack by violent left-wing mobs could do their jobs. The military is not conducting law enforcement activities themselves, but simply support and protection.
Okay. Your colleague, fellow Republican Rand Paul, had this to say about that Intel deal. If socialism is government owning the means of production, wouldn't the government owning part of Intel be a step towards socialism? Terrible idea. Do you agree with your fellow senator?
Well, I think this is a pretty specific example, and I listened to your lead, and what everything has in common had to do with national security. I think as it relates to Intel, it's a 10% stake, a non-governance position, by the way, in exchange for the billions that they're getting from taxpayers. But I think the most important point to make here for this, I think it'll be pretty temporary move, is you can't have the only chip maker in the United States go down, which is what the concern is. So 90% of our chips that you put in everything from iPhones to F-15s, which are built in St. Louis, by the way, are 90% of them come from Taiwan. And so onshoring, reshoring these critical minerals, these critical technologies for our national security is really important. I think that's what was driving the decision.
Okay, let's talk about your book. Let me read you to you. You list a number of Biden-era emergency declarations: COVID-19, student debt, climate change, transgender rights, and you write, these labels gave them cover to bend or arguably break the law with sloppy executive orders that were extremely vulnerable to legal challenge. Currently, Senator, there are 51 states of emergency on the book, 9 of them declared since President Trump took office the second time in January, including his emergencies around the border, energy, and trade. Don't the same concerns apply now for the Trump emergencies that applied for the Biden emergencies?
Well, the courts have upheld that President Trump can declare an invasion effectively under the Alien Enemies Right Act. That's what's being litigated right now. But I would draw a distinction here. What we saw in the first 4 years, or in Joe Biden's 4 years, was an environment where censorship, I mean, big tech companies were colluding with the federal government. That was the nature of our Missouri versus Biden, where we uncovered, and I'm sure as a journalist you would appreciate this, the First Amendment's very important. The government shouldn't be dictating what social media companies have up and what people can say and what they can't say. And so in the book, Last Line of Defense, I hope people check out on Amazon today, we take the deposition of Fauci. We take the deposition of Elvis Chan, who was the FBI agent who was pre-bunking the Hunter Biden laptop story in 2020. even though the FBI had the laptop in 2019. So regardless of your political stripe, the amount of censorship that was happening with the Biden administration was chilling and downright scary. And you take the student loan debt forgiveness case, he had no authority to do it. We took that to the Supreme Court and we won too. So the fact of the matter is a lot of these battles are being played out in the courtroom, and the point of the book is that conservatives need to stand up and push back, because the left at this point is simply about power and control, and they've weaponized the DOJ, as you saw during Joe Biden's term, against citizens, against Catholics, and so we stood up, we fought back, and we won. So this book is really a playbook of how you go do that.
But wouldn't the people on the left today say that that's exactly what the Trump Justice Department is doing? That's what you just said is exactly what I hear Democratic attorneys general and Democratic governors say about the Trump Justice Department.
Well, they might say it, but the courts haven't held that up. The courts have held that he can fire people at USAID, he can handle programming of personnel, and he can handle core Article II powers like, enforcing our immigration laws, which is why the deportations have been held up. The John Bolton example this week, that was being investigated, by the way, by and large, by the Biden DOJ. So I don't think that has anything to do with going after political enemies. It's about accountability at this point on a documents case, is my guess.
Okay, last thing. So the trade emergency, right? The president is invoking emergency authority to intervene on trade, to do all of this trade stuff. If it's an emergency that is addressing trade deficits over the past 50 years, can something be an emergency for 50 years that wasn't an emergency before? Does it seem arbitrary? And I guess maybe to put a finer point on it, isn't this really Congress's job, not the president's job?
Well, look, you're not going to get an argument from me that Congress has abdicated a lot of its responsibilities over the years. I think you look at the administrative state writ large, the idea that a lot of congressmen stand up and say, I voted for the greatest bill in the world, but I can't believe what the EPA did. I think the Chevron, or the overturning Chevron last year is a big step. Congress should take more of an active role. But I think President Trump is moving forward on core Article II powers as the commander-in-chief that the courts have upheld.
Okay, America, if you still called Panera Bread the St. Louis Bread Company, you would know him already. But if you don't, there he is, Senator Eric Schmitt. We thank you. Joining us now.
Thanks for the plug.
Joining us now, former Democratic Senator from Alabama, Doug Jones. Senator Jones, thanks for being here. You just heard what Senator Schmitt had to say on the president's recent actions. You're a former federal prosecutor, and you have been outspoken about what you see as the current administration's abuses of power. But it was hard for me not to think that the senator had a point about what President Trump's predecessors did over the years to weaken the barrier against abuses of executive authority. Does he have a point there?
No, he absolutely has a point. The difference is he is a current United States senator. He should be seeking bipartisan resolution to claw some of these powers back and let Congress do their job, Chris. There was there's no oversight at this point in President Trump's administration. In the first Trump administration, I teamed up with a couple of Republican senators to call for the clawback of powers involving tariffs with the Congress, because that's what the Constitution says it should be. Right now, this is a prime opportunity for both sides of the Hill, both Republicans and Democrats, to get together and say, wait a minute, we saw it. Republicans think we saw it a lot under Biden. We're seeing it now under Donald Trump. Let's take the opportunity to get some bipartisan legislature for Congress to do their job and not have this unitary executive where one president of the United States, regardless of the party, has all the power and you leave it to the courts to sort it out. That's not Congress's job, to leave it to the courts.
Okay, on the Bolton raid business, relying on your expertise here, in the wake of the Mar-a-Lago raid in 2022, some very respected constitutional scholars raised concerns about precedent. Harvard professor Noah Feldman said, quote, the fact that the power to prosecute criminally rests within the executive branch, not an independent prosecutor, means it is up to the sitting president to make sure our system doesn't devolve into a series of retaliatory prosecutions of former government officials. It was hard not to think about that when you watch Donald Trump sort of enjoying the misery of John Bolton, one of his principal critics on foreign policy.
No, there's no question about that. Look, this is not an issue of retribution, Chris. Let's just say it like it is. This is revenge. This is revenge on a former inner circle member of the Trump administration who is now speaking out against the Trump administration's foreign policy, particularly with Ukraine, as well as the president himself. This is purely revenge. And I know that this started under the Biden administration because John Bolton did write a book. There was controversy. That apparently was put to bed. You don't continue this for so long. And, you know, you mentioned the Mar-a-Lago. The real big difference in Mar-a-Lago and here is that in the Mar-a-Lago situation, the National Archives, the others spent a lot of time trying to talk to the president and his lawyers about getting these documents back, making sure that there were no classified information stuck in a bathroom in a box somewhere, which is exactly what happened. Instead, they moved those boxes around. That didn't happen, to my knowledge, with John Bolton, and it has been years since all this. And we've seen investigations of Mike Pence and Joe Biden and others involving classified material. I want to remind folks, too, Chris, about one other aspect of Donald Trump's personality and his MO. And that is exactly what he said to President Zelensky in the phone call that resulted in his first impeachment. It's exactly what he asked Bill Barr. And that is, don't worry about the ultimate outcome. Just announce an investigation, and I'll and my members of Congress will do the rest. That's the frightening piece of this, Chris, that we will start investigations. The head of the FBI will live stream it as if it's the O.J. Simpson car chase in Los Angeles. And they're politicizing this much more than they should. And it's about the investigation, not the ultimate outcome.
Okay. You made fighting crime part of a successful, unexpected victory for a Democrat in Alabama back in 2017. You're a former prosecutor. You take this stuff seriously, and you have urged Democrats to take people's concerns about crime seriously. But right now, many Democrats find themselves in a position where they are defending obviously unacceptably high crime rates in D.C. and other cities in order to oppose the president's police takeover here and proposed action in other places. Law and order concerns have definitely fueled a lot of Republican success in the past decade. Are Democrats falling into a trap by seeming to downplay crime in order to oppose Trump?
You know, Chris, I quite frankly haven't seen Democrats downplaying crime. I think the question is how best to fight that crime. Remember, crime was on a downslope in the Biden administration. It continues that way. Cities still struggle with crime. I mean, any crime is too much crime. But the question is how to be strategic to do that. Unlike what Senator Schmitt said, the National Guard is not a crime-fighting unit. That is not what they're trained for. They did not go to Los Angeles to protect immigration officials out there. They went as a show of force. Those were peaceful demonstrations against the actions of ICE. And all of a sudden you had tanks rolling in and National Guard coming in, and that escalated the situation. In D.C., most of the National Guard are not deploying around the high crime areas. It's around Union Station. They're taking away homeless people. That is a matter of optics. So if you want to fight crime, I agree with them. Look, I am one to never have said to defund the police. In fact, we should give law enforcement more. But we've got to be strategic about fighting crime. This is a show of authoritarianism. This is a show of a tough guy with military, because that's what they do in all these other countries. And I got to tell you, Chris, people ought to be very, very concerned.
Okay, but I would just say that a long time ago when there were a bunch more Southern Democrats, people like, I don't know, Bill Clinton, the Democrats made being tough on crime a big part of the story, right? We're going to fight crime. We're serious about crime. Will you acknowledge that part of a problem for Democrats in the past 15 years has been that in an effort to embrace the idea of community policing and racial justice and healing and all of that, that Democrats may have lost some of the messaging on fighting crime, which gave Trump an opportunity?
I absolutely will acknowledge that, because some of the folks in the far left of the Democratic Party started talking about defunding the police after George Floyd. The majority of the Democrats in the Congress, I was there when all of that happened, did not believe in that, did not see that. But we lost the messaging, because that is where the most popular folks on social media were. And that was the message that got picked up by the media. So I think our message got lost. But the proof is where folks are the rubber meets the road. For instance, in Birmingham, Alabama, we had a crime problem. Mayor Woodfin has done a great job of reducing gun violence, of reducing the murder rate in Birmingham. I think across America, Democrats are stepping up, and that's what I hope people will look at.
All right, Senator, thank you. All right, America, if you've ever yelled "Roll Tide" at the Houndstooth in Tuscaloosa, you would know him already. But if you don't, there he is, former Senator Doug Jones. We thank you. Coming up, as America gets ready for its quarter millennium birthday bash in July, we're here to help you get ready for our big 250. What was the role of faith in our founding, and how does it shape our civic life today? Jonathan Rauch has a fascinating new book. Plus, is President Trump trolling the blue states with threats to send in the troops, or is this promises made, promises kept? And speaking of trolling, Gavin Newsom unlocks the power of the laws. Will it work for him and his party? Our best in the business panel of journalists will help us answer it, and so much more when The Hill Sunday returns. Welcome back. 10 months and 10 days from right now, the United States of America will celebrate the 250th anniversary of our founding. And you may know that we're a pretty patriotic bunch here at The Hill Sunday. That's why we're launching a new feature, USA 250. From time to time, until next Independence Day, we're going to be exploring the history, the ideas, and the system that make America exceptional. We start this week with a hot topic, the role of religion in the founding and whether America was a Christian nation or a nation of Christians. Take a look. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. That's what then President John Adams wrote to the Massachusetts militia in 1798. It's an idea, though, that fell far out of fashion, particularly on the American left in the second half of the 20th century. But natural law is getting a new look from liberals as natural rights come under increasing threat from the authoritarian urges ascendant in politics around the world and here at home. Jonathan Rauch would have once been an unlikely person to author a book about the essential connection between religious faith and human rights. When he was a leading figure in the fight over gay marriage 2 decades ago, he famously described himself as an unrepentantly atheistic Jewish homosexual, always pluralistic in his writings for The Atlantic or scholarly work for the Brookings Institution. Few would have foreseen him becoming the author of this. Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy, which reads almost like, if I dare say, a call for another great awakening. Jonathan Rauch, thank you so much for being here. Let me read you to you. I'm going to start reading you to you. My claim is not just that secular liberalism and religious faith are instrumentally interdependent, but that each is intrinsically reliant on the other to build a morally and epistematically complete and coherent account of the world. What do you mean by that?
I mean that science can give us explanations for the material world, and liberal government, liberal democracy can give us a constitution and processes for resolving our disputes. But they can't give us answers to ultimate questions like, why are we here? They can't give us a fundamental reason to distinguish good from evil. Human beings look to religion from that. I don't have faith, but I've come to think that that's a gift that I lack, not a special thing that I should be praised for. And I've come to see that a lot goes wrong in society when people don't feel they have a grounding for meaning and for morality.
So this very important thing, you know, as we're moving up to the 250th anniversary of the founding, perhaps underappreciated in the founding was the cleavage between church and state, and the idea that the state would not have the power of religion over people, and religion would not have the power of force over individuals, and keeping those two things apart, which is super. I hope most people would agree that that's been super for humanity. Excuse me. But it does lead us to a point where Well, let me read you to you again. Liberalism requires us to share power and sometimes relinquish it. It requires us to keep faith with the Constitution even when we aren't winning. The Church of Fear does the opposite. It adheres to political apocalypticism. Every election is Flight 93, a last stand against an existential threat. What do you mean by Flight 93 evangelicism, and why is that a disservice to the Christian church?
Well, so this might take 30 or 60 seconds.
You go.
The founders did not intend to set up America as a Christian nation.
Right.
In fact, they were asked to by Christians, and they specifically refused to put any mention of Christianity, Christ, or Jesus in any of the founding documents. They wanted
more a deistic.
Well, they wanted that
faith.
separation. They understood that involvement with the state would corrupt the church. But what they did think is that they counted on civil society to provide the grounding, the social glue to keep a diverse country together. They knew the Constitution couldn't provide that.
Right.
So they were counting on schools and families and communities.
A Tocquevillian idea of these.
That's right, and especially the church, which in their day was white Protestant Christianity. So fast forward to almost 250 years, and we're in an era when Christianity, white Protestant Christianity, evangelicalism, which is really what my book is addressed to, it's still the predominant faith in America, in many ways the defining faith. It's taken a different path. It has virtually merged with the Republican Party, and many of its parishioners, even more actually than pastors, really believe there's a war on Christianity, a war on them and their culture and their values and their kids, and that's turning the church into a place of fear. In many cases, they're abandoning the methods, the ideas of Jesus Christ for something much more partisan and political, and that's putting a big strain on the church and also on our democracy.
So Christian writers like, or writers who are Christian, like Tim Alberta and others, have chronicled this shift and what happened there. Why should these people listen to you, right? Because if Tim Alberta's writing, he's saying, I grew up in the church and I did this. Why? Who are you?
You got me there, Chris. They should not listen to me. I am an atheistic homosexual Jew, or if you prefer, a Jewish homosexual atheist.
However you want to order.
That's what I am. I was made that way by whoever made me. But they should listen to Jesus Christ.
Right.
Jesus, the core of Jesus' teaching is three doctrines. First, don't be afraid, by which he means don't go through life hunkered down in fear. Fear God. Right. But don't let your life be dominated by fear, because then you'll make bad and unwise and irreligious decisions.
Yeah, because we're supposed to know who won. If you're a Christian, you're supposed to believe we know who won.
Well, that's right. And fear of the next election is not what we should be focused on.
Right.
We should be focused on the next world in Christianity.
Right.
His second tenet, be like me. Imitate Jesus. That same attitude toward life. That's not a fear-based attitude. That's an attitude of radical equality and looking after the least of us. It's not about power. And the third thing is forgive each other. Talking about retribution, I am your retribution. That's not the teaching of Jesus. It is for God to make those decisions. So when the church abandoned those things, I'm just saying, the Jesus version of Christianity is better than, I don't know, the political version.
It's a pretty good appeal to authority for a Christian audience, right? You've gone right to the top. But I do think there's a message in your book for non-believers, for non-Christians, for other folks to understand the importance of Christian ideas and ideals in the founding, and why that sort of maybe bland sometimes, but civic faith was essential. Talk about that a little bit, about the other audience.
Chris, that's so important. I'm trying to bring together two audiences in this book, and one of those audiences, frankly, the me of 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The dumbest thing I ever wrote was an article in The Atlantic celebrating secularization. I called it apatheism. This is now 22 years ago, and I thought, with the decline of organized religion and Christianity, we'll be like Scandinavia. We'll have less conflict, less dogmatism.
You knew what my next question was going to be.
Boy, was I ever wrong. All the social indicators on things like loneliness, anxiety, depression, community, isolation have all gone the wrong direction as the church has gone under. So I have to look at myself and fellow secular liberals and say, we did not understand that Christianity, not just religion, but Christianity in our country is a load-bearing wall for our democracy. And when it caves in, when it can't do that job of grounding our society in the morality of Jesus, no one else can do that as well.
Oh man! So and by the way, anybody who's never read the Constitution of Knowledge should. It would be malpractice not to mention what a good and important book that is. We have to go, but I want you to tell me about Mark McIntosh, which bookends this book and brought you the real connection in here. Talk about this guy.
So my journey begins when I'm 18 years old. I'm paired up with a college roommate. I am, at that point, a militant atheist, one of those obnoxious people who's always going around arguing with Christians. But that's because, you know, I was a young gay kid and Christianity had no place for me.
Yeah.
Mark was also 18, a person of deep Christian faith who is the first person who showed me how Christianity actually can shape a person's entire life. And he had a sense of humor, he could be bawdy, sarcastic, bad mood, all of those things. He was a human being, but he was a Christian human being. And that was the first time that I saw, wait a minute, there's something here beyond hypocrisy and cruelty. And that was a turning point.
Jonathan Rauch, thank you for this great book. Thank you for helping us be smarter as we head into USA 250. We thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a lot more patriotic goodness in the months to come. And if you have a suggestion for a story or an idea you would like to see us discuss, hit us up on X at The Hill Sunday. Do it. Still to come, the latest on the Bolton raid, the U.S. crackdown on immigration, and new uncertainty about the economy with our best in the business panel of journalists when The Hill Sunday returns. Welcome back to The Hill Sunday. Our best in the business panel of journalists joins us right now. James Hohmann, deputy opinion editor for The Washington Post. Tall Copen. Yeah? Yes, good? Okay. I've been screwing it up all day. We're going to get it right. Deputy D.C. Bureau Chief for the Boston Globe. Emily Brooks, I know her name because she works right here. She's the House leadership reporter for The Hill. And our friend John Tamney, editor for Real Clear Markets. James, we start with you. Doug Jones made the point in his interview. Democrats left themselves exposed here on the issue of crime pretty substantially. But I have to think that the idea that Donald Trump, having explored what he can do in D.C., now he says he wants to take it to other cities. Is this trolling? Is this just talk? Do you think this is really going to take place?
I think it is real, and I think it plays well with his base, but it also is that perennial balance between security and liberty. And Donald Trump ran on law and order. It continues to be one of his real strengths. And I think despite, we had a poll this week that showed overwhelming majorities of D.C. residents oppose what he's doing in Washington. Well, yeah. But when you talk to people, I think underneath that there is a desire like, well, if they get rid of the dirt bikes that are going around my neighborhood, if they stop the carjackings, if they stop the murders, then I'm okay with it. And so I think that there is some of that, and it does play to the strength that the president wants to project.
When you heard Senator Schmitt talking about, you could hear that in his voice, he acknowledged that there were some concerns that he had about executive overreach and all of that stuff. Is there a practical limit among Republicans for this kind of stuff? We can just say, of course, if it were President Kamala Harris sending out the regular army into red states to enforce laws, that there would be a different opinion.
Different opinion is putting it lightly, I think. I mean, I think we have yet to see Republicans really strongly draw a line for the administration that they're not willing for them to cross. I mean, they hem and haw and they express concern in private, and on rare occasions they've actually said no to a nominee, but we have seen them, I mean, even Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I mean, they were like, oh, I don't know if that kind of nominee can ever pass, and then they all got in line. So, I mean, to ask if there are concerns, I'm sure that in private they would express concerns, but will they do anything about it? I don't know. You know, and at the end of the day, it's very hard to, in some substantive way, stop the president as commander-in-chief from doing this with troops.
Emily, John Bolton's house, office, both raided by the FBI. The president looked very happy about that, and all of that. Is this the exception, or do you think we're going to see more? Is the message here to critics of the administration, be careful?
Well, I don't want to speak for the administration. Certainly, Bolton is a big critic of Trump, and as we've written many times on the Hill when he says things, even on this show. And I think that it does certainly send a chilling effect to anybody who might be criticizing the administration, particularly former allies, people who might be targets of Trump, who he might particularly want to go after. We don't know a lot of details about the particulars of what exactly they were looking for. We're hearing classified documents, something like that. Seems to be a pretty notable, popular thing that everybody keeps on getting wrapped into, classified documents. So anybody out there, if you have classified documents, you know, watch out.
No one has ever trusted me enough to have any classified documents. It's not a problem. Okay, John, let's get to the Intel deal. When Barack Obama took a strong hand with General Motors and Chrysler, when the Obama administration subsequent to the bailouts of the auto industry directed these companies, you're going to build electric cars, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. Republicans freaked the freak out. They went nuts. Intel and the list of things that we did. What is this? What is going on?
Well, no, I mean, just ask yourself the question, what if Kamala Harris, President Harris, had purchased a 10% stake in Intel?
Yeah.
The reaction from the right would be enormously loud and critical. This is fascism. She's favoring a company from her state. She's slowing down the natural evolution of the economy. Let's never forget, economies gain strength from weakness, whereby the bad is put out to pasture so that the good can get access to capital. Everything about this runs counter to what Republicans have historically believed. Yet, as we sit here right now, there's not a peep from them about the dangers of what's happening.
Well, and we were talking about, John, in the break about how the political moment we still find ourselves in was born out of bailouts and government interventions in the economy and all of that stuff after the panic of 2008.
Well, I think it's bigger than that. Let's never forget, markets look into the future. The markets were pricing everything that was happening, including Fannie and Freddie, and they did not crash. When did they crash? They did when Ben Bernanke and George W. Bush said, we need to substitute our viewpoint for that of the marketplace, and they started bailing companies out. Someday, economic archaeologists will state the obvious. The crisis was the bailouts. It was never what happened up to it. When you substitute yourself for the market, you invariably get a major meltdown.
This Atlas Shrugged edition of the Hill Sunday. We'll be back. Coming up, dank memes and 2028 dreams. Gavin Newsom is giving his party a lesson on the politics of irony when the Hill Sunday returns.
Blake Berman brings you the biggest stories from the top newsmakers in Washington.
He's fully capable of being friendly and shaking hands and at the same time saying, here's the economic consequences that are going to happen.
I mean, this was a really fiery response.
NewsNation's The Hill, weeknights at 6, 5 Central. News for all Americans.
Literally or seriously, California Governor Gavin Newsom unironically asking Democrats to follow him into a more cynical brand of politics. Is Blue MAGA the wave of the future? Back with us again, our best in the business panel of journalists, starting with you, Tal. Newsom, is this, you covered him, you did California politics. He's getting a frisson of a thrill. Does this have staying power? Is this for real?
Well, staying power, I mean, in today's world, how can you ever say that something has staying power?
48 hours.
I mean, you know, it's interesting because on the one hand, it's very easy to dismiss something as like, oh, you're playing memes for an online audience that, as journalists well know, can be fleeting. You know, winning on Twitter is not going to translate into, but at the same time, you know, he is very effectively injecting himself into every conversation. People are giving him a second look. Some of the stuff he posts is pretty funny. You know, that's part of how Trump got so enmeshed in our politics, is he just kind of threw stuff out there. People laughed, people chuckled. They couldn't stop hearing his name. So I don't know. Maybe this could snowball into a winning strategy.
Well, I'm looking forward to 3 years of AI-generated pectoral muscles for every presidential candidate.
Truly the golden era.
Truly the golden era. James, we will wait to talk about 2028 as much as you and I both want to talk about 2028. The move in California does come with a risk. So what Newsom's doing is they're going to redo their map. They're going to put it in front of voters. I went through the districts. They're putting some fat in the fire in California, right? They could, if the blue wave is just a blue ripple, they could end up being net losers in California.
And certainly in 2030, if you still have these maps, if there's a Democratic president and the backlash to that person, I do think it's not without risk. The Newsom people put out an internal poll that showed this ballot referendum where they're going to vote on whether to change out the map. It has support in the 60s, but this is going to be an off-year election. Turnout's going to be really low. Do Republicans turn out? Weird things happen. A lot of times, I think so much of this current arms race that's happening does feel really short-sighted. What if Hispanics and men continue to move toward the GOP?
I have the counter question for Emily, which is they've got the same problem in Texas in reverse. If Democrats win Texas, and this is what I saw in Silver Bulletin, if Texas Democrats win just by 2 points among Hispanic voters in Texas, the new map is a bust, basically. And so the Republicans are banking they're going to keep these are permanent gains with Hispanic voters. But if we're setting up Alligator Alcatraz, maybe that's not true.
Well, I think that's going to be a big question. Republicans certainly do think that this wave of Hispanic voters that has come their way is going to have staying power. Could be very important for them for Texas, but also for California as well. So that's going to be a very big test for them.
All right, John, I'm not going to make you do political maps because you're about money. The Federal Reserve says it's going to cut rates, and they're forecasting the rate cut to come, which the administration had been pushing for. But the reason they're going to do it is not a pleasant one for the White House, which is that the tariff consequences, they say the tariff consequences are kicking in, job numbers, earnings report. Give us the economist's view.
I'm going to mention economic archaeologists again. Someday, and it's not too far away, economic archaeologists will ask, why on earth did left, right, center, and in between ever take what the Fed does so seriously? We are talking about a global economy. Credit is produced globally, and it goes to where it's treated best. The notion that the Fed, fiddling with rates, could somehow improve a booming economy is laughable, because a booming economy attracts growth. The Trumpists say it's booming right now, so capital must be flowing in if that's true. Conversely, if it's not, no amount of Fed fiddling with a little rate could change the fact that the capital outflows from around the world would be substantial. The Fed just does not matter. I know it's not accepted wisdom, but watch it come back to life a few generations from now, and they'll confirm what's true now.
You're not going to get that anywhere else on television. I'm just here to tell you people, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get economic archaeology anyplace else in America. Panel, we thank you guys so much for being with us today. This was good. Oh, yes, and by the way, you should sign up for Whole Hog Politics. You can get more like that there. Just scan that QR code. You'll be thrilled if you do. And then, after that, you should stick around because coming up, we're rising from the ashes in our almanac next. Welcome back. This is your almanac for today, Sunday, August 24th, 2025. On this day in 79 AD, supervolcano Mount Vesuvius erupted after centuries of dormancy, burying the ancient city of Pompeii in smoke and ash. It wouldn't be the last time. After dozens more eruptions, Vesuvius blew its top again in March of 1944, but this time in an Allied-occupied Italy in the heat of World War II. The magma-mantled victim, Pompeii Airfield, where American servicemen with the 340th Bombardment Group were based. When the smoke cleared, some 80 B-25 bombers were blanketed in smoldering ash and debris. But Pompeii, with its famous Tower of Mercury, would bring forth a new kind of winged messenger, One of the witnesses to that Vesuvian destruction was pilot Deke Slayton. He would go on to be one of the original 7 astronauts assigned to Project Mercury, the first U.S. manned spaceflight program. A heart condition grounded Slayton before launch, making him the only astronaut on the project not to fly. Though Slayton was stuck on Earth, he never stopped looking to the stars. He spent years rising in the ranks at NASA, becoming the coordinator of astronaut activities. It was in that role that Slayton would leave his mark, choosing the Apollo 11 astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, to be the first men on the moon. So whatever you're digging out from this week, we hope you keep your sights on the heavens. Until next time.